You know, if I had a magic wand and I could sort of make one wish for parents, it would be to introduce the concept of gratitude to children from a very early age. The research on this is so vast now. It's very clear that gratitude and happiness are highly correlated. And when we're grateful, we tend to be happier. And so especially as children, even if they're young and they don't understand what the word gratitude means. And gratitude just means taking time to think about things in your life that you appreciate or that you're thankful for. Even when they're young, they're too young to understand that concept. It's what made you happy today? What was a good thing that happened today? And establishing that and asking children those questions from a very early age is something that the research really informs sort of in terms of healthy psychological development in children. And so there's ways to incorporate gratitude so that it becomes a habit and a practice for families. So whether that is, when you're eating a meal together, everyone goes around and says one thing that they're grateful for that day or that made them happy, depending on the age, the conversation changes. One of my favorite exercises, and I have seen this, and especially when my work at Sick Kids, one of the most powerful things when I would talk to parents is this concept of a gratitude jar. So you just take a jar and with your children, you write things down every day that was a good thing and you put them in the jar. And then it becomes, especially when children are having a bad moment, you can encourage them to go to the jar and take one of the things out and read it. And it helps to shift their mood, especially when they're caught in one of those sort of spirals that are going downwards. And this is something that it's a visual reminder, which is important. And it's also, they're going back to their own memories. And so that seems to be something that can be very profound for children, is helping them with a tool, the jar. And it's low cost, right? It costs nothing. You can just recycle a jar. And yet the impact can be really profound.
Yeah. And then,
I love that.
Looking at the emotional part and now looking at the sort of physiological part component, would you like to speak to this really recently, rapidly gaining research field of the microbiome? The gut-brain connection, the brain affecting the gut, vice versa, the gut affecting the brain.
Yeah.
When we look, we see 90% of the serotonin in the body is sitting in the small intestine at all times, not the brain. So there's this huge intimate connection between gut, brain, gut. Would you like to speak to that?
Absolutely. And this is why I love science, is because we continue to learn new things, right? And I think if we were sort of rewind back in time, we thought, we operated in isolation, right? Like your mentally is your brain, and focus on if you've got a gut problem, you go see your endocrinologist, whatever it is. And we're realizing that as humans, everything is all related, and especially with the gut. And I think parents see this a lot because you can see with your children when you feed them how they act, right?
Oh, almost immediately.
And
I would argue.
You give your children tons of sugar and what happens, right? And so what we put in our body is such a huge part, but it goes beyond just like the nutrients of it. It's how it affects us. And it's like, the term hangry, right? When your child hasn't eaten or you're it's a real thing. And when we understand that nutrition not only fuels us from a sort of physical, how we function in the world, but mentally as well. And the research just keeps coming out on this, that it's all so connected. And it's really something that I think we never focused on before, and yet it's a very critical piece of it, right? And how we feed our body, what we do in terms of food, supplementation, nutrition, all of that plays a really key role in our moods, in how we feel, and how we process and regulate emotion, in how we interpret experiences. It's such a huge part of it, right?
Sure.
It's making headlines. Why a healthier gut can lead to a happier mind. I mean, and this starts in early childhood. Your clinical experience around children's microbiomes being wiped out for so many different reasons, not just the fact that supplements are maybe an important part of reestablishing diversity, but unnatural birthing, or let's call it, C-section, the lack of breastfeeding. I mean, this is all really maybe impacting happiness out of the gate from day one.
No, I mean, the real understanding of microbiome now is that, it starts from birth. It's actually starting as soon as, the breastfeeding occurs. And the diversity of food is what sets up a balanced microbiome. So the diversity of food is the first base, so we have to look at diet, food, nutrition. And then if anything impacts those beneficial bacteria, then we have to address that, replace it, keep it going.
Right.
The question is, with the microbiome, we're actually outnumbered by the number of bacteria in the microbiome versus the number of cells in our body. So if they're not the right guys, it's a problem, especially for children. So understanding the importance, that's really the base of our physiological health, well-being, immune system. And obviously all of that translates into how we feel, where the happiness part comes in.
Absolutely.
So if we can keep the microbiome happy, I think that's a big part of keeping the child happy as well.
Yeah, I often, when I'm sort of talking to parents, I sort of give the analogy, if you want to build a house, right, you need all the things to build a house. So you need doors and windows and bricks and cement. Yeah. But if you don't have windows or cement, how do you build a house? And our gut is cement or windows. It's an essential part that we have not realized until now, but the data is coming out. But we need all of these things. They're foundational, right? And it's something that I think when we think about a child and like, how do I help them be happy? We're often not thinking automatically about that, but it's such, and I love that we're having this conversation because it's such an important part. What we put in children's bodies and the history that they've had from birth really do play a huge role in what they're feeling now. And if something's going wrong, or if children aren't, performing cognitively or performatively or academically, the question is to look at these sort of things, right? And to really focus on that as a parent.
Well, if we can control one thing, or at least the majority of what nutrition is about for the first 7 years, it's what you're putting in your child's mouth, or perhaps maybe more importantly, what you're not putting in your child's mouth.
Yes.
But before we get into the weeds too deeply into the role of nutrition, mood, behavior, and happiness, because we want to get there, we want to get deep on that. What we were talking about a minute ago, I wanted to bring this up. This is not so recent, but I think it's powerful. The role of positive emotions.
It's an iconic paper.
It is. And I thought you'd know it, and I think I'm right. And what this is really getting into is this broaden and build theory. So what you were talking about a moment ago just made me think this. I think it applies throughout all 7 years. The research shows that better health, energy, and fitness from the physical resources, of course, and that we can understand, part of which is nutrition. But the main idea is that experiencing positive emotions helps to broaden people's thinking and behaviors. For example, when people feel happy, they're more likely to explore new ideas and try new things and connect with others. And I think that, if I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, it starts in the family nucleus, doesn't it?
It absolutely often does, especially when we're looking at children. And, I think when you start to increase positive emotions, and when we look at happiness, frequency of positive emotions is much better predictor of our happiness than intensity.
Right.
So it's really about, and often when people think this, I will be happy when, they think about the big moments, the birthday party, the graduation, but really it's about the day-to-day sort of micro moments of happiness and joy that start to broaden and build. It also, when we experience something good, it creates what we call in research an upward spiral of positive emotions. And I think a lot of us are often more familiar with the downward spiral, right? Where we have like one thought and then like the world is ending or we're dying. Right? But to Barbara Fredrickson's work, it's really about these positive spirals, because when something good happens, you have a bit more pep in your step, right? You're a little bit more friendly. You're a little bit happier. You're more likely to connect with someone. And that's a huge piece of it. And what we do know from research is that social connection is a really big part of happiness. It's necessary, but not sufficient in terms of living a happy life.
Right.
And the family unit is the first place that children often experience that connection, right? It's connection with
Perfect.
family.
So let's segue right into the dinner table, because I think that there's this abundance or exposure to social media through screens. So we got to minimize that as much as possible, and an underexposure to family, internal nuclear family culture, and what exactly we're talking about around the kitchen table. Doesn't matter if the kid's 0 to 2 and they're throwing food at you, or they're a little more mature into their 3rd, 4th, 5th year. Why is nutrition so important? Why is the experience of eating as a family so important? Just walk us through some practical ways parents can introduce nutrient-rich, mind-boosting foods that are going to contribute to happiness, but also the family unit experience, if that's not too much to cover.
I
It's
love
a lot.
it. And to touch on sort of what we had talked about earlier, when we think about childhood being this window of opportunity to establish healthy habits, having a meal together as a family is one of those habits that can be really, really powerful for a variety of reasons. One, you're actually, if you have a meal without screens or devices at the table, you actually have to talk to each other because what else are you going to do, right? And so now you're encouraging communication. You get to learn about what your child is doing. A lot of parents don't know what happened that day with their child, right? And if you don't have that opportunity to have those conversations, that's a big piece. Also, when you start to have healthy meals together, you're teaching your child about cooking, right? Cooking is a lost skill. Like, I've done a lot of work with an organization called Growing Chefs, and it's a charity that teaches children about food. And I remember they have chefs come in and teach children about, different nutrition. And I remember a child being confused once. They didn't know that a French fry came from a potato. So a lot of children don't have this basic nutritional knowledge about where food comes from. What does it mean to have a healthy plate of food, right? Not the sort of drive-through, eat in the car as we're going. But teaching children. Also, with children, when we can expand their palate of different foods, especially when they're younger, they're more likely to continue with that. We see a lot of kids that only want to eat a couple things, right? And so having and modeling, like we talked about earlier, this behavior of eating a variety of healthy foods, you're showing your child that that's what we do. And they learn from that, right? They're sponges. And so having that nutrition, big piece, cooking, right? Having that knowledge of food education, and then having that connection as a family. And I think that by doing that, you're also showing your child that this is a priority for your family.
That's right.
And when you show your children what's important because you make the time is something that is such a precious resource. And if you're showing your child that it's worth the time, that we spend the time together, then you're modeling that for them as well.